Thank you for attending our meeting this evening. Thanks to those of you who are on the phone, and thanks to you who made your way over here to Oakland. My name is Meredith. I am the Deputy Director for the DTSC Safer Products and Workplaces program. But as of 2 weeks ago, at the request of our new Secretary, Jared Greenfeld, I was asked to serve as acting director for the department. And it is an honor to continue to be asked to serve in this new capacity. So, in case you haven't attended any of our regional updates, the purpose is to give you a snapshot of the work taking place in the department across the state, but put it in a regional context and give a high-level overview of some of the work that's specific to the region, and of course this means the Bay Area tonight. We value public input. It's very important to our decision making, and in the materials you were provided, there should have been some information about the opportunities you have to engage with us. Even today, there was a workshop on our efforts to learn how to take different environmental stressors and different factors that are impacting those particularly vulnerable communities and incorporate that information into our decision making. And so I have a chance to sit in on that and really got a flavor of the dynamic interaction between the regulators and the academics and the community representatives, and I think the work there is really quite impressive. So tonight you're going to hear about a variety of topics that affect the Bay Area and as well as the state. And I should say that I've lived or worked in San Francisco, San Jose, Oakland, and Berkeley, and I'm a resident of San Francisco, and so this is my home, and this work is all very important to me personally. The presentations will cover a wide range of topics. They touch on different areas of the department. So what you'll hear tonight is about how we're handling some pollution that occurred from operations that ended years ago, but are still impacting on the ground pollution. And we're still taking steps to address those impacts. We'll give an update on some of our work to improve the transparency and consistency and accountability for our permitting decisions. And again, some of that work that we talked about earlier today. And we'll give you an overview of a variety of projects in the Bay Area. And lastly, you'll hear about what DTSC is doing to contribute to the cleanup of hazardous materials from the recent state of wildfires. I hope the information is useful to you. I also hope that you'll give us feedback as to whether or not you find it useful. We appreciate the opportunity to be able to meet with you. We're very excited. This is one of our best turnouts, I think, for one of our evening meetings, and it's very encouraging that are willing to engage and make the time to meet with us. So we will look forward to this partnership and to continuing it as we take our steps to protect the people and the environment of California. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Deputy Director Mendoza.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here. Before we get started, we're going to introduce everybody who's up here with us. I'm Geraldine Lopez Mendoza. I'm the Deputy Director of Public Participation for DTSC.
Good evening. My name is Ana Mascareñas. I'm the Assistant Director for Environmental Justice and Tribal Affairs.
Good evening. My name is Luis Caravaggio. I'm the Acting Deputy Director for the Hazardous Management Program.
And good evening and welcome. I'm Mohsen Nazemi. I'm Deputy Director for Site Mitigation and Restoration Program.
Thanks, everybody. So again, thank you for being here. I really appreciate all of you taking the time to meet with us in person and all of those of you online. A couple of quick housekeeping items. To exit the building in case of an emergency, please just go out the same way you came in. So go out these doors to my right, I think your left, and go to the doors in the front and you'll be escorted out of the building. If you're looking for restrooms, you would go out the same door, make a right down the hallway, and they're on your right-hand side. Just in terms of housekeeping, with respect to public comments this evening, we do have opportunities for public comments after each of our presentations, including this one. But because we want to keep them timely, all public comments will be limited to 3 minutes. We don't have a clock, unfortunately, with us this evening to tell you the time, but I will be keeping the time here, and there will be noise that will be made after 3 minutes, so you'll know when your time is up. So we already have somebody who would like to give public comment. I'd like to introduce Mr. Matthew Zugsberger, who is representing himself this evening and also shared with us some written materials beforehand. Marcus, if you could, Mr. Zugsberger right here.
Good evening. Thank you guys for allowing me to speak. I'm here on behalf of original complaint that I filed several months back pertaining to chemical toxins at Drake Cicero. I also want to thank you guys for your active role in Lake County as a Lake County resident, making sure that some of the people got handled properly. That was a really big deal to us up there. We already have enough issues with toxins left over from the old mining days to add to it. It was a great issue. My name is Matthew Zugsberger, and I live in Upper Lake, California. Professionally, I've been a commercial diver about 15 to 17 years. I appear before you today as someone who has worked as a marine diver on the National Park Service's Drake's Bay Cicero Wreck Removal Project. Because of injury I sustained on that project, I can no longer work as a commercial diver. On that project, I observed firsthand law violated, policy ignored, and procedure trampled. Let me begin by addressing two matters. First, today, I'm submitting a letter to the various documents which I have provided to Acting Director Ms. Williams, which addresses the DTS investigation of Drake Cicero Point Reyes. I ask that you please read, review, and act on those recommendations. Second, I would like to express my deep appreciation for the thorough manner in which the DTSC criminal investigation personnel and the DTSC technical experts involved in my claims. The NPS contractors were informed of my safety and other concerns, but ignored them. NPS contractors, Peterson and Galindo, not only ignored my concerns, but told me to shut up when safety and other concerns were raised. The National Park Service, the same. The Interior Department's Inspector General, their response, they directed the NPS to investigate itself. The result, the Fox reported all is well inside the chicken house. Secretary of the Interior, Sally Jewell, I submitted a letter detailing misconduct and requested an independent investigation to the Secretary. It was never acknowledged or answered. For more than 2 years, public officials have looked the other way, and by their silence and inaction, tolerated personal and environmental harm to people and workers. Words are inadequate to convey what it was like week after week and month after month to face ignored complaints, unanswered letters, unreturned calls, and an unspoken "we don't care that your body receives chemical burns and neurological disorders" attitude. I wish to take this opportunity to publicly thank the DTSC for taking the matter seriously, exercising your responsibilities, and taking action against serial violations of law. I have a chart that I provided before the meeting. On December 15, 2016, I filed a hazardous materials spill report to the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, OES. Well, according to the OES report, I stated that work is not being done in an environmentally correct way, which is resulting in the release of an unknown amount of chemicals to the waterways, surrounding vegetation, and marine sanctuary. OES immediately notified 31 official departments and agencies. Federal and state, including Cicely Muldoon, Superintendent Point Reyes National Seashore Doctor, Benjamin Becker, Chief Scientist for the NPS Point Reyes, and Cassidy Trupel at the California Coast.
Mr. Zugsberger, if you could wrap up.
I'm almost finished.
Okay, thank you.
I prepared a chart taken from the email circulated by the Governor's Office. All the data entries come from the email circulated by the OES the same day, December 15th. I filed a complaint. No action was taken by these officials, department, and or agencies. Looking the other way, that's not how our laws are supposed to be implemented. I have listed several recommendations. I will provide them in my letters I have provided. On behalf of my family and my community, I thank you for your due diligence in my investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Zugsberger. I appreciate you being here this evening. I also am aware that Mr. Bradley H. of Green Action would like to speak.
Good evening, Bradley Angel. I'm the Director of Green Action for Health and Environmental Justice, and also organizations a member of the California Environmental Justice Coalition. And I just, well, I'm glad to be having this meeting. On seeing the materials that was handed outside, it's confirmed that things haven't changed. And Dr. Williams, it was nice talking to you earlier. You have a lot of work to do. I know you just started, so you're not responsible for about to critique, but these handouts are more of a misinformation campaign from DTSC. For example, I'm glad they helped some community, but when it comes to low-income communities of color in the Bay Area and around the state, it's a different story. So, for example, the handout on the regional cleanups, and you know, I might not stick around, see how this meeting goes, where it talks about the Hunters Point shipment. So thank goodness it mentions that Tetra Tech committed massive fraud there. Unfortunately, in your campfire cleanup handout, your agency's campfire cleanup, it fails to mention that Cali PA gave Tetra Tech's affiliate, wholly subsidiary, hundreds of millions of dollars, despite the fact that they committed massive fraud in Hunters Point. On your handout about where it talks about the Hunters Point shipyard, it has the audacity to echo State Department of so-called public health's ridiculous claim that there's no everything safe at the housing, the rich people's housing that was built on the former Superfund site, where all your agencies claim there's no possibility. DTSC, EPA, Navy, there's no possibility radioactive waste was there. And then when radioactive waste was found right next to homes, the state puts out this nonsense, which you have agencies repeated here. And everything's just fine, no risk whatsoever. I'd like to know which one of you would like to volunteer to have a radioactive marker under your pillow or next to your bed or under your bed. Because that's the fact that's in here. For the Hunters Point ship for Treasure Island, oh, it's great. But you know, I just don't happen to see anything in here that acknowledges that Tetra Tech, the same crooked company that committed fraud at Hunters Point, did all this work at Treasure Island. Leaving it out is a serious omission. It's basically perpetuating fraud on the public and putting people's lives at risk. At Treasure Island, there are low-income people of color in subsidized housing living with radioactive waste lines in their backyard. There have been uncovered piles of radioactive waste behind broken fences that DTSC's project manager couldn't care less about. And I don't, thank goodness, I don't think she's working there. RISCAR saw it and helped address it, which we appreciate. But Green Action and the community was ignored for years, bringing it to your agency's attention until we brought you on the bus and made you see it. So it's just the same old, and last I'll just say the Senate Bill 673. But funny, you don't put in here that that was supposed to be implemented 13 months ago. Not because Green Action said so, but because the law said so. And because the civil rights settlement that DTSC and Cali PA signed on the dotted line said so. And DTSA just blew it off. So,
if you could,
and so, I'm going to finish what I have to say, because people in communities are being put at risk by negligence from DTSC, false information, propaganda meetings like this, and not doing your job. And the last thing I'll say is when we challenged former DTSC Director Barbara Lee, why she just completely blew off the legislative mandate of Senate Bill 673, that cumulative impact criteria is supposed to be adopted by last New Year's. And the same thing was in the civil rights settlement, which is court enforceable, but she signed it. She said, well, we violated it because I care. The hell with that. You want Dr. Williams, we hope you can bring resources to the good folks in the agency who are working really hard to do this, get rid of the people who are covering up the polluters, and carry out tradition, and stop putting out nonsense like this.
Thank you, Mr. Angel. I have a comment card from David Gassman. Mr. Gassman, did you want to speak now or after a specific item?
I'm not quite hearing you, but I'll simply share a quick thought that occurred to Go home, fine, you're welcome, that's good. I'll just share a quick thought that occurred to me as Dr. Williams was speaking. She was talking about the turnout and here at the meeting. And it occurred to me, if the meeting were held far more proximate to Bayview Hunters Point, I have a feeling have a much larger number of people attending. That's basically the thought. Thank you.
And who's
Thank you,
notifying
Dr.
me at
Nazemi.
this point about this meeting? I don't think anybody.
Actually, we sent an email blast to all the lists of folks the projects we're discussing them tonight. So we gave you Hunter's Point, our email list got a notice of it, as did the Treasure Island interested folks, along with McClellan Air Force Base, Zeneca, the Zeneca project in Richmond, as well as the former Mare Island Navy shipyard.
So a lot of the activists have no idea. I'd like to see that list.
Thank you for your input. We're going to move on to item number 2, which is our lead acid battery recycling presentation by Mohsen Nazemi, our Deputy Director for Site Mitigation and Restoration.
Before you do that, had an opportunity to comment. Yeah,
Yes.
I would like to comment after that. I'll be on the page. Comment on that.
No, you can comment. There's public comment after item 1, which is her welcoming remarks.
Oh, okay, yes. Good evening. My name is LaDonna Williams, and I'm actually from Vallejo. And this Dr. Williams, welcome. Glad to see that we've got some new leadership in place. But I did have a question. You mentioned that there was a meeting this morning, and we did not get. We got somewhat of a notice a couple of weeks ago from Ms. Bonnie, who's been pretty responsive. But she listed a time and date for 10 o'clock from 10 to 1 with no address. And the phone numbers that we called, you just got a voicemail. So unfortunately, I called your main number on Hines Street, and I got a Luli Manella, who was very rude. We were just simply trying to ask. We drove all the way out here from Vallejo. We were asking, oh, wait a minute, we realized there was no address stated. We tried to get information only to be treated disrespectfully. So my question is, what meeting occurred this morning? Because we understood the time change from 10 to 1 to 6 to 8 to 9. And we also didn't get this previous notice that Ms. Mendoza was talking about. So there was an adequate notification of this meeting, which is why you don't see more residents here.
I will let Ana Mascarenhas respond to that. I will say there were 2 separate meetings. One meeting was related to cumulative impacts and community vulnerabilities. And she'll describe that meeting. That was the meeting earlier today, and then this one was always scheduled to have a wider agenda.
So, Ms. Williams, I apologize if it sounds like the email notification didn't have the address in there, and that you had an experience of not getting information that you needed. The workshop that we had this morning was a meeting in this building from 10 to 1, and it was a follow-up on that October workshop that you attended regarding permitting criteria on community vulnerability and cumulative impacts. So I can follow up with the folks planning that meeting. I was part of that meeting as well. I apologize, information did not get to you fully, and we can make sure that in the future we can have complete information, that you have a direct line to be able to get information that you need on, and we'll follow up on how you describe that interaction went as well. So as far as future meetings on that topic, this was around hazardous waste permitting criteria. You're definitely on the list. And we can also make sure you're on the list for notifications about everything in the Bay Area when we have meetings like this as well for the future.
Thank you for that feedback. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
So far.
Again, my name is Mohsen. I'm the Deputy Director for Site Mitigation and Restoration Program. I again want to welcome you to our regional update meeting, and thank you for spending time to come here this evening to listen to us. Tonight I'll be providing you a status update on a few different projects within our program here. And the first one is the lead acid battery recycling facility investigation and cleanup program that is also referred to as LABRIC.
the Lead Acid Battery Recycling Act of 2016 was under Assembly Bill 2153 that was sponsored by Assembly Member Cristina Garcia. And the purpose of it was to fund an activity to investigate and clean up areas of the state that have reasonably been suspected to be contaminated by operation of lead acid battery recycling facilities. And the funding for that comes from an additional $2 charge on new batteries that are sold in the market, the lead acid batteries. Now, lead has been used for centuries in many different applications. They've been used as an additive in fuel to reduce knocking. They've been used in paint because it's durability, and also they have been recycled and used for various operations. The old recycling and smelting facilities, that there are some pictures of it here, were pretty much all shut down in some decades ago, with only two lead acid battery recycling plants that left operating in the latest centuries. And one of them was Exide in the city of Vernon, that is also shut down as of 2014, and the other one is also in Southern California called Cometco, which is in the city of Industry. Now, the problem with lead is that it is a toxin. It's a neurotoxin. It affects our brain, how our brain operates and how we learn, especially if we're dealing with children. Lead is also a national criteria pollutant where the federal US EPA has established an ambient air quality standard. Therefore, it's regulated from that perspective. And that's why it's important that we identify and clean up contamination of lead in soil and other media. But before we can do that, we need to verify under our program where the lead came from and work to discover and prioritize these sources of potential lead. Now, in doing that, our department cooperates and works very closely with other agencies. LABRIC program coordinates our efforts with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, California Department of Public Health, and local agencies like Alameda County here in Northern California. DTSC and US EPA are working together in West Oakland to understand sources of metal in soil, including lead. And in 2018, EPA with DTSC assistant evaluated and cleaned up 11 residential yards around the former Sunset Smelting and Refining lead smelter site. DTSC and US EPA have completed soil sampling at almost 200 public rights-of-way locations across West Oakland in an effort to better understand the distribution of lead in soil. Also, we have worked with Alameda County Healthy Home Departments with work to identify any areas that need further evaluation, such as lead-based paint. And we continue to work with the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project to actively engage the community in our effort and to prioritize areas for our evaluation. Our scientists are searching for documents, records, and evidence of lead-acid battery disassembly activities and smelting operations under the LABRIC program. We look to identify physical and structural characteristics such as furnaces, kettles, melting pots, stacks, and scrap metal piles. And the LABRIC program is developing a methodology and protocol that we can use to assess potential sites to qualify for funding under this program. Today, PTSD discovery effort have identified 39 potential lead-acid battery recycling facilities in the state of California. And after an evaluation, DTSC identified and prioritized 4 smelter facilities for further assessment and sampling. Those 4 sites were included in a report that DTSC issued to the legislature. And there are 2 locations in Northern California and 2 in Southern California.
These are the 4 sites that DTSC has prioritized for evaluation. As you can see, the Sunset Smelter and Refining Company is in West Oakland. There's another site in Northern California, CNS Battery and Lead Company in Sacramento, West Sacramento. Then there are 2 sites in Southern California besides the 2 that I mentioned earlier, the Exide and Metro. These are 2 other sites, Earth Metals, Los Angeles, and Western Lead Products in the City of Commerce. I'd like to just give you a quick overview of the work we have done on Sunset Smelting. This is a location that historically operated a smelter in Oakland. We directed sampling and found lead levels in soil up to 1,100 milligram per kilogram at the site itself. Even though the lead-impacted soil was under a paved surface, DTSC required further assessment of the site. And land use restrictions are now in place at the site, and inspections are conducted on a regular basis. As I mentioned, in spring of 2018, US EPA, in coordination with the Department of Toxic DTSC, conducted a cleanup of 11 residential yards adjacent to the site. So community outreach is an important part of our lead-acid battery recycling program. Earlier this year, we held actually a workshop in this building and one in Southern California in the City of Commerce. There were a number of participants and provided us with comments, and we actually considered a lot of their input and enabled our program to be structured better. Now, what's coming up, I want to give you a quick update. We are required to provide a report to the legislature on a regular basis, so we will have an annual report going to the legislature early this year. In addition to our fabric program, we continue to assess sites, and we're preparing contracts for sampling at prioritized sites that I mentioned earlier. When the data comes back for that sampling, DTSC will assess information and will initiate soil cleanup as appropriate. Finally, under the LABRIC program, we work under a branch that is headed by Richard Hume. Richard, if you can raise your hand, sitting back in the back row. And you can find actually additional information on our website. We do have a page for lead-acid battery recycling facility program, investigation and cleanup. And I will take a quick break here to see if there are any questions before I move on to my next presentation. Yes, ma'am. Can you wait for the
Hi, my name is Marty Walters. I'm from Pumas County. Sorry, I'm too close. I'm curious about the program that you're describing here compared to the lead-acid battery cleanups that are happening under the Part B or the Corrective Action and Closure Program. Is there overlap? Are they the same sites? Are they different sites? And how are you ensuring consistency in terms of cleanup under those 2 different programs?
Great question. Actually, the 2 facilities that I mentioned earlier, Exide and Cometco, they are both under corrective action required to conduct investigation and provide a assessment of the contamination, both on-site and off-site in the community and in commercial areas, residential and commercial areas. That work is being done as we speak. And I know we have cleaned up over 600 properties, residential properties in Southern California that have been impacted by Exide operations. And we are pursuing Exide to held them responsible for all the contamination on-site and off-site. And I'll be happy to talk to you about that, but that is being done as we speak. So it is
those 2?
Those are the 2 that most recent lead-acid battery operation. There are a number of older sites that have shut down that they have, for example, undergone investigation and cleanup at the time that they were shutting down under a closure plan, and also further investigation that we are going to conduct to see if there was contamination beyond their property.
Mr. Angel?
Yeah, I was wondering, for the facilities you mentioned, one question is, where does the waste that's getting cleaned up?
Webcasting this.
Okay. So I was wondering where the waste that's getting remediated is sent. And so, for example, if it's sent to Kettleman City and Buttonwillow, the two operating hazardous waste landfills in the state, both operating, by the way, on expired permits that were issued using English-only environmental impact reports in Spanish-speaking communities, police dogs, racist hearing rules, or like the Exide cleanup, turns out that your agency, some of that waste is sent out of state to a garbage dump next to the Colorado River Indian tribes, a dump that would never be allowed to receive this type of waste in California. So I'd like to know where this stuff is going, and the Kettleman City Civil Rights Settlement, which applies to your agency statewide, not only applies just to Kettleman, but also requires that and emphasize that civil rights considerations need to be considered for all DTSC's regulatory actions for facilities under your jurisdiction, which would include cleanup sites. So if you could respond to these points.
Thank you for your comments, Randy, and it is a good question about. So one of the areas that actually Anna has been working on is to look into how we can reduce the transport of contaminated soil and see if there is ways that the contaminated soil can be treated on site, so it does not take waste from one community and drop it into another community and cause additional environmental justice problems. But in this case, I can get back to you exactly where this waste is being taken. After each home yard is sampled, based on the level of lead in the sample, it'll identify whether it's a federal or state hazardous waste, soil or waste material, and then it'll be taken to the appropriate landfill that accepts that. And these are done all under legal and sites that do have ability to accept these. They're not just dumped out.
Okay, but that's my question, is that you talk about appropriate sites, but you didn't respond. You talk about appropriate sites, but that's the problem, is that what DTSC considers appropriate sites is garbage dumps next to Native American reservations out of state, or the two hazardous waste landfills that are operating in California under expired permits that ran through with racist hearing rules. So how is that appropriate? And where is the analysis that we think is required by the Civil Rights Act?
Right. When I mentioned appropriate, I didn't mean that it is appropriate to take it to that community, but they are appropriately allowed to accept this.
Under what appropriate allowed by your agency, maybe in your agency's mind, but the reason there was a civil rights settlement with your former director's signature on the dotted line is because ramming through the permits for Kettleman City, for example, there were police dogs. Spanish speakers got half the time to testify as English speakers. Police intimidation, racist hearing rules, English-only documents. So I don't think that's appropriate. And that's why we filed a civil rights complaint and sat through 7 months of federal mediation with your agency in Cal EPA. And this is what we get. It's appropriate? I don't think so.
Well, I'm not the person that has all of the background information that you're bringing up here, but let me tell you that I'll guarantee that I'll get back to you and let you know where the contaminated soil that is done under Exide cleanup is going to be taken or have been taken to. So you will know whether it is.
I know where it's taken. That's the problem.
Were there any other questions for Mohsen Nazemi about this presentation? Yes, ma'am. You could just let us know your name.
My name is Tony Johnson. I'm with Alameda County Health and Wellness Department. I want to make a comment to Mr. Nazemi and his group. DTSC is learning a lesson, and the fact that they came in last year to West Oakland, I want to really commend them in regards to environmental health impacts within a marginalized community. They came into the community, they saw the health impacts that were detrimental to the community that has been impacted so much through a lot of different environmental hazards. I've worked in this community within West Oakland for over 20 years, and I'm hearing some of the problems associated with Hunter's Point as far as lack of communication, as far as lack of community engagement. And I want everyone to know, and again, just really commend Mr. Nazemi for changing the scope of the environment by allowing the community to be involved. We're similar to a grassroots organization, but involving environmental indicators project, involving the neighborhoods, the residents, doing a door-by-door, foot-by-foot campaign in order to alert everybody as far as the testing that's going on, to get input on not only the impacts, but also the funding and some of the remediation resources that are available, and then also working collaboratively with other organizations so that we can increase the funding and make sure that the impact and the resources are going to the community, to the people. So I really want to commend you for actually doing it right in West Oakland last year.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I actually want to take this opportunity to introduce a new staff member. One of the things that we recognize about the LABRA program is how important it is to work very closely with local government agencies, as well as nonprofit organizations and community-based organizations in Northern and Southern California. So as part of this effort, we've actually hired 2 public participation specialists who are going to be focused on this LABRA initiative. One of them in Northern California and one in Southern. The one in Northern California is based in our Berkeley office. She's here this evening, Jerry Dietrich. Jerry. So be sure to introduce yourself before you leave today. But she's going to be here working on the ground with the same community stakeholders that you mentioned as we move forward with the cleanups of the West Oakland project, and she'll be doing similar work in West Sacramento. So thank you. Also, because we're being webcast, I want to check in with my team to see if we have any email questions or comments. No? Was there anyone else? No, I don't have, some of you may have seen when you checked in, there was an opportunity to provide comment cards. I actually don't have any comment cards on this particular item. So unless there's any more questions, we'll move on. Actually, we're going to go to number 3, which is the presentation on the hazardous waste permit decision criteria for permitting.
Okay.
And for that, I will call upon our senior hazardous substances engineer from the permitting division, Evelia Rodriguez, who will be discussing our improved permitting criteria and violation scorecard.
Hello, and thank you for this opportunity to discuss my project of the last 2 years, which is the hazardous waste permit decision criteria rulemaking. My name is Evelia Rodriguez. I'm a senior hazardous substance engineer with the permitting division under the hazardous waste management program. I'm here today to kind of give you a high-level summary of the rulemaking that was adopted in September and actually became effective this month. It includes 5 major elements. There's a violation scoring procedure, which provides, it includes a violation scoring procedure, which provides consistent and a transparent way of accounting for a facility's compliance history. We have strengthened the financial assurance and responsibilities so that taxpayers are not stuck having to pay for cleanups that facilities cannot pay for. We have amended the training requirements for facilities personnel so that we may enhance safety. We have now required a community involvement profile, which is to provide better information and to promote community involvement. And we have added a health risk assessment for all facilities, which will be an assessment to identify risks in facility operations. First element is the violation scoring procedure. This procedure establishes a process for evaluating compliance history by scoring significant violations at a facility that are found during the inspection. It will accord points and assign points based on Class 1 violations. Now, these are the more serious of the violations that are found at a facility. Examples of this may be failure to perform timely cleanup operations. It could include improper storage of incompatible waste. Once the Class 1 violations have been identified, at the very end of an inspection, DTSC will assign an inspection score. This inspection score will add up all of the Class 1 violations and the assigned points. Now, it could be that we find no violations, in which case the violation scoring could be 0. Or it could be that we find multiple ones, in which case we will calculate out each of those inspection scores. The next calculation is an annual facility score, an annual facility VSP score. And what we do here is at the very end of 2019, we will go back 10 calendar years ending in December of 2018, and we will add up all of the inspection scores for every single one of those violations that have occurred. And we will average it out and give it a number. Now, this number will then be assigned a compliance tier based on 2 thresholds. And depending on that threshold, the facility could be deemed acceptable, conditionally acceptable, or unacceptable. This isn't a math problem. This is just to give you an example of what these scores might look like for an individual facility. On here, we would have a listing of all the inspections that have occurred during the previous 10 calendar years, an individual inspection violation score, a total for all those inspection scores divided by the number of those inspections to come up with the 2019 facility VSP score. And then we compare that against the threshold and decide what compliance tier should be assigned. Now, I mentioned these compliance tiers as being acceptable, conditionally acceptable, and unacceptable. Well, once the facility has been scored, it may or may not trigger additional requirements. If we find the facility to be acceptable, there's no additional requirements. However, if we find the facility to be conditionally acceptable, it'll trigger an independent audit by a third party. And DTSC will review those compliance reports and then determine whether improvements are required at that facility to help solve the compliance problems that have been identified. Now, if a facility shows up as being unacceptable, DTSC will initiate denial, revocation, or suspension proceedings. It will start with a public meeting where all the information will be shared with the community. And then it will proceed on to a comprehensive review of the compliance with all environmental laws, not only Class 1 violations. The second element of the regulations were to strengthen financial responsibility. In it, I'm only going to go over some of the prominent elements, which is we're setting a deadline for facilities to secure money, to investigate and clean up chemical releases during the operation of their facilities. We are also requiring that the elements for financial test and for insurance be increased. So we want to make sure that there's enough money secured to close and clean up any kind of releases caused by the facilities. And the last element is insurance must now be approved by the California Department of Insurance. Some of these financial mechanisms are very complex, and it requires a certain expertise, which we believe the Department of Insurance excels at. Another requirement that you find in these regulations is that we've increased the training requirements. Facilities now must submit to the department an annual certification that assures that all their personnel have been properly trained. We're expanding the emergency response training to include additional elements, and we want to make sure that the function-specific training for all personnel that deal with hazardous waste has been completed, and for all other personnel that are located within the facility boundaries have received general awareness training, so they're aware of some of the ongoing operations of the facility. Future hazardous waste applications now will include a community involvement profile. The facility must complete this profile with the application when it's submitted. Now, this community profile will include a description of census data, including race, income, age, housing, burdens, linguistic isolation, etc. The facility must also describe any interest the community has expressed regarding the facility's operations or any complaints against the facility. We also would like the facility to identify the location of nearby tribal lands. And the last element of this community involvement profile is the identification of off-site pollution sources. When we talk about cumulative impacts that these facilities have within their communities, it has to be taken under the guise of what other pollution burdens this community is exposed to. So this could include other hazardous waste generators. It could include on-site treatment of generators in areas nearby, cleanup sites, and transportation corridors. And what I mean by transportation corridors, we're talking major freeways, highways, railways, and ports, both seaports and airports. The very last element of the regulations include that the facility submit a permit health risk assessment with their application. Now, a health risk assessment is a method that is used to analyze the potential for harm due to what chemicals can be found in land, air, and soil, the potential for harm of each of those chemicals, and then identifying who is being affected and how they're being affected. Now, what's unique about the health risk assessment that we're requiring with the permit is that it will address not only the existing contamination found at the site, but all the facility operations, including potential for accidents. This is a flow chart of how the risk assessment might occur. All facilities will be required to submit a questionnaire. The questionnaire will be an inventory of everything going on in the facility, a list of assumptions that they are building their risk assessment on, and a conceptual site model, which could be a picture or a diagram to represent what is going on in the facility and how they envision chemicals at the site coming in contact with people in the community. Now, once our toxicologists review this questionnaire, it will either result in no further action if it's a tiny facility that's very simple and there's no releases of any kind, or it could be a health risk rating level, health risk assessment, or it could result in a more complex quantitative assessment called a baseline. Now, for any of you who would like further information, here's my number. I have an email that you can contact me at, and we have a web page where there's additional information for anyone wanting to read more about this rulemaking.
Thank you, Evelia. I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask for questions.
Well, before we go to questions, we actually have some comments, and then we can go to general questions. First, we have, I believe it's a joint presentation, or is it separate? From Ms. LaDonna Williams and Pat Dodson. Yes. Okay, so they are from an organization called All Positives Possible, and their presentation is regarding silent killers of Vallejo residents.
So what we're showing here is the data that community members and residents collected in South Vallejo. And since we're talking about scorecard and permitting, we wanted to point out to you the areas that where the residents are affected compared to the companies that are being permitted. And we want to find out in your processes, what are you planning on doing as far as creating a buffer zone around EJ communities like Vallejo, Hunters Point, East Oakland, West Oakland, Richmond, where we have these issues where we're already overburdened and you guys are using old science of risk assessment instead of cumulative impacts when we are talking about those of us that are already overburdened with a high level of strokes, asthma, cancer, we've got Bell palsy, while you guys are still allowing permitting Phillips 66, we have Selby slag, we have a pending cement plant, we also have remediation that is going on our waterfront with DTSC, and I did hear the lady earlier talk about and commend you guys for your public participation, inclusion in West Oakland. That has not occurred in Vallejo. And what we're finding is those who have organizations that have really stayed on you guys and have done work like the West Oakland Indicators Project, we commend them, we support that work that they're doing. That loudmouth gets fed, but those of our communities that have not been engaged in this process have been ignored. And so what we're asking here is, they have already allowed certain companies to come in and do their damage. What on your permitting, your new processes that you're talking about, is there information of denying permits of any new companies coming in? How are you working with other agencies in AB 617 in reducing emissions? Like, how does all that work? And the problem with us is that we keep having these processes change on us as residents. As we're raising our families and we're burying our loved ones, we're supposed to understand these processes that you guys purposely confuse us and exclude us from. For instance, this morning, this meeting that was really important on cumulative impacts and permitting, I get an email that tells us it's from 10 to 1, but no address. We were literally 2 blocks away from here trying to find out where to go. Why was it limited? We should not have had to respond if we're coming in order for an email to come out. We're on the list, should have been notified. So anyway, that's part of it. The other thing is we have huge percentages of our children that have asthma and Bell palsy. We've also realized, just talking with the residents, that the animals are dying. This is reminiscent of my old community, Midway Village in Daly City, where DTSC came in there and covered up and just basically have allowed the people over the years, and we're talking, 30 years now, to die. We see the same patterns being done here. I don't know what's happening in West Oakland, but clearly, as Mr. Bradley pointed out and others have pointed out previously, the data that you guys are dispensing is inadequate. It's not telling the truth. It's more cover-up. So we actually want to see that change that I guess one of the people had talked about, that they commended you guys for your community engagement. We want to work with you, but if you're not going to do it, we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to keep coming at you.
Ms. Dodson, did you have anything you wanted to add? We just want you, thank you. We just want you to, number one, when there are agencies that begin to help us and we can find people to work with us, they move, they change out, and we have to start all over again. Some of the information that's out here has been around well over 30, 40 years. Mare Island is a mess. It is definitely still contaminated, and I live near Island, live near there. We're contaminated, and many times we have spills and we smell it at night. And Mare Island is growing again. So there's a lot of stuff that people are workers, they don't know what they're doing, they're throwing things in the water, I'm sure. We got a cement plant that wants to come in, okay, with their money. We have Lennar, who's been very much so in the background of Mare Island. We know what he's going to do. And on that part, they want to build some more structures very quietly that can't be sustained on that land. They're not going to be able to hold out. There's a lot of problems happening in South Vallejo and Mare Island. We keep coming to these meetings hoping that the people who know what to do, the people who are smart, please help make legislation that makes these companies hard to be able to get in. Don't let them come in. We don't need that kind of structure to kill us. And I mean, there are a lot of cancers, there's a lot of things, and it's happening a lot faster. There's other ways to make it clean, to keep us healthier. And you have the power to help us make changes. Do it. Help us, please. Thank you.
Thank you both for your comments and for your being here. We do have some materials available about Mare Island that we have here about sort of where we are with those things. Evelia, I don't know if this is something you could speak to with regard to how the new criteria might apply to the situation. I don't know if it's appropriate.
I was just going to say before she speaks, can we add just a little bit more to what Ms. Pat was talking about? And that is pointing to the materials that you have where you have piecemeal the Mare Island and our water straight there, our waterfront. And as she mentioned earlier, that we have Lennar that's in the background, but we also have Tetra Tech as well. And if those two names sound familiar to you, the same issues that has happened at Hunters Point when it comes to radioactive waste, we noticed on one of those handouts that you mentioned radioactive waste is not basically no longer an issue there in Vallejo. And why would we believe that? When we see that you guys basically allow them to lie in Hunters Point, I think we need to reopen Vallejo, and especially particularly when it comes to radioactive waste. Why should we believe the data when the data was fraudulent in Hunters Point? We want that issue reopened here in Vallejo, and particularly Mare Island. And we want a structure where it's not broken up, where we're running around from one to the other, being confused of your processes.
This is regard to the Eastern Early Transfer Yard, the waterfront. Thank you. The shipyard? Yeah, the shipyard. Thank you. Hold on just a second. Evelia, did you want an opportunity to address these?
The regulations that we just adopted and became effective affect only hazardous waste facilities. There's 109 of these in the state, and there is not one located in Vallejo at the moment.
That's not true, because I believe DTSC is doing a former manufacturing gas plant cleanup remediation in Vallejo. That was something that we just recently found out. So is that not on?
That's a separate issue. So what we're talking about, with what Evelia's been talking about, is permitting, where facilities are seeking permits to be able to use certain materials on their site, and we give them rules in those permits that they have to abide by. What you're referring to, I believe, is the cleanup aspect, where there has been pollution on that site, and you're concerned about the cleanup and what is going on with respect to the cleanup of those sites and whether or not they have been.
The cleanup and the permit, because eventually you know you're going to permit, and there are homes that are actually being developed right in that area. So not only is it just the cleanup aspect, but we know you're cleaning up to permit as well. Eventually, right? I mean, you're not, that area there is not just going to be remediated, which they've done inadequate notification of that as well. But we're talking about all of it, and that's what I'm saying is understanding process. I get you want us to focus only on the permitting aspect?
So it gets complicated because we permit facilities to utilize certain materials on their site that we then have to give them rules that they have to abide by, or they lose their permit. Yes. Then a whole other aspect of our work is the cleanup aspect, which is the site mitigation that Mohsen's in charge of, Mohsen Nazemi. I think part of what you're referring to is after we have done that cleanup process and we have released the land back to whoever is going to have control over it, the decision making that happens at that point is separate from us.
Because we also have this, we're talking about the area period. This is a DAC, disadvantaged area. We're also talking about the health that is currently existing there. We're talking about the permits that has already been allowed from the other companies. And then we have this part of the land a little ways down that now has this remediation going on, or future remediation, which is going to still be in that permitting thing. We want a buffer zone around all of that. We want you guys to set up processes where you can no longer allow toxic emitters to come in through your scorecard or whatever it is that you set up. We want protection for them. However way that is supposed to be, we're supposed to be able to look to you all to do it. We're not supposed to have to be the experts in this. That's what you're paid to do.
Yes, ma'am, you're absolutely right. So a question that Mr. Riz-Gargazi wants to speak to. Is anyone here from DTSC who is a specialist on the Vallejo site? Is there a subject matter expert on the Vallejo site here this evening? So why don't we make sure to put you together with these ladies before the end of the evening so that if they have specific questions that you can answer.
Jeremy, I just want to clarify. So when the site is cleaned up, the facility, there isn't a facility that's requesting for a hazardous waste permit from the state of California. So there isn't a facility that's coming in and saying, DTSC would like you to permit us for hazardous waste operations. But the permits you may be talking about, we need some more clarification. Once the cleanup is completed, that land gets sent back to the community or the local agency, actually permits the reuse of that land. So in the case of Vallejo, the city of Vallejo permits that or allows them to rebuild for residential or wherever the planning is for that community. So it really goes back to the local agencies to make that decision. But that permits.
Land use issue.
That's correct.
Right, and that's the problem. Because as we look on the wall, I was going to say, and therein lies another problem where you guys are allowed to, or agencies are allowed to point the finger back at, say, our city council members' land use issues where they're making them. But in this case, where there's fraudulent activity, there's cover up, there is data being basically, destroyed, misplaced, covered over. Where does your agency step in and add that protection to communities that's already on your scorecard? Because that's where Cal Enviro Screen and Scorecard and all of these maps and data was created. It's because you've collected it over 30 years or more. So we already know where our suffering communities are, right? So how is it that you're allowed to just keep pointing to processes that continue to do harm when you're supposed to be the agency that comes in to protect the public from this harm? We're not seeing it through your scorecard. We're not seeing it through your processes, your permitting. We're not seeing it through the remediation because they're really not keeping the community in the loop. They're actually confusing us. And they're actually having us run around by your processes being broken up the way that they are. It makes it real difficult to understand.
So the gentleman in the back who is part of the DTSC team is Daniel Murphy. So, Mr. Murphy, if you can make sure to check in Ms. Williams and Ms. Dodson before the end of the evening, because there are significant questions here relating to the two different fact sheets that we circulated this evening, and some of their questions have to do with process and making sure they understand the process. And if there's DTSC decision making involved, we need to be clear about when there are opportunities for them to participate in that decision making. Is that okay?
We don't want to keep going through meetings, giving these comments and acting like we're the experts, and we want you guys to change these processes that begin to actually protect and eliminate the toxic threats in our community.
I understand. I see you. Bradley. And then, what's his name again? Marty. And then we'll come to you, Marty.
Yeah, so, these concerns from Vallejo, which are very well articulated, have been ignored by, I think, by a lot of the agencies. So, I don't speak for these folks, but I think communities everywhere are kind of tired of hearing promises, and then it's the same old. Like the not, I mean, you can go back to Midway Village. But I want to address the issue of the violations. And I know this new criteria is for permit applications. So just two things really quick. One is because other facilities or sites where there's violations, not only has the state, for example, not fined Tetra Tech 1 penny, they still have their radiological license in California, and the Board Green Action's petition to revoke it. I don't know what more you need, but it doesn't instill a lot of confidence. In terms of facilities and permit applications, some of your staff here, I think some of the new folks would know, but some of the longer time staff will know that, again, using the Cameron City situation, small farmer community, largest toxic waste and PCB dump in the West, permitted with racist processes, courtesy of DTSC in the county. When Chemical Waste Management was trying to get their permit application a number of years ago to expand, the state was doing everything it could to help them out. I was shocked. I get this email from DTSC. Outrageous, serious, significant violations. I think it was like 72 violations. Chem Waste failed to report hazardous waste spills. We're going to hold them accountable. We're going to do all this stuff. So I think it was 70-something violations. But when it came time to actually approve and deny the permit, these outrageous violations where they failed to report, where they knew they should report, not once, not twice, 70-something times, all of a sudden, in the permit decision, it said, oh, they were just small, minor paperwork violations. So we have like zero confidence in DTSC. So you can have this criteria that was mandated by the law to consider permit applications, but it's going to be a cold day in hell, I think, before DTSC actually denies permits on this. I mean, out of the thousands of permits in DTSC's history, how many have been denied? A handful. And it's really because of advocacy for communities that even those, in most cases, I would imagine. But the bottom line is that you can have the best and strictest criteria, which these are not. There's zero confidence and zero track record to rely on that you're ever going to use it to actually protect the community. And that's really sad, and that's why people in Vallejo, and by the way, West Oakland indicators didn't show up tonight because they didn't agree with how this meeting was planned, so just for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Angel, for those comments. Mr. Gassman, you wanted to make some comments as it relates to this item?
Yeah, I'll simply ask my question. Thank you. And then I didn't understand what you meant by secure. I think the expression was secure funding. Does that mean to get a loan, to take an insurance policy out, to set aside revenues? I mean, why would a bank or other finance agency lend money to a polluter like that? I simply don't understand precisely what you were saying, and I wish you could clarify it for me. Thank you.
When a facility secures a permit, there is financial assurance that needs to be secured for the closure of the facility, for corrective action of the facility, and for future maintenance of the facility. There are 8 financial assurance mechanisms. There's letters of credit, there is bonds, there is letters of credit, there is financial tests, and those are the ones I can remember off the top of my head. But each one of these sets up requirements for how a facility proves that they can pay for any damage that they do to the environment. There's also liability insurance to provide, like, if you have an accident, a one-time financial responsibility that'll cover incidences. There is releases. Keith? Any others?
So it's trust fund, an insurance policy, surety bond, financial test.
Can you repeat that, Evelia?
Surety.
So a trust fund.
A trust fund.
Insurance.
Insurance.
Letter of credit.
Letter of credit.
A surety bond.
Surety bond.
Financial test.
Financial test.
And if it's not a RCRA permit or RCRA equivalent permit, there's something called an alternative mechanism.
If you're not a RCRA permit, because we have standardized permit facilities, there's an alternative method that's allowed. They can come up with a combination of any of the above.
Thank you. Hopefully that pushes it out a little bit more. And Ms. Marty, I'm so sorry. I went out of order. I apologize. Are you ready now? Yes, it's your turn. Thank you for your patience.
Try not to shout into this time. I neglected to welcome Dr. Williams into the acting role earlier. And I also just want to comment too that, you know, when my neighbors from Vallejo and their comments, I really take that to heart because the Department of Toxic Substances Control is the premier agency within the California government for dealing with toxics. And there's all these really interesting aspects to that, including the Safer Consumer Products program that we're not discussing tonight. But I think it's very much in line for us to come to this agency for answers on toxics and have a good explanation of not just the statutory obligations that the department operates under, but sort of the bigger picture of toxics in California and how the different programs fit into that bigger picture and what's happening in communities with community health. So that's my kind of big picture comment. I have a very specific comment about this presentation. One of my biggest concerns about the hazardous waste permitting program is that it doesn't cover the 90-day accumulation storage areas that are under the Permit by Rule program. And I'm concerned about whether or not DTSC is going to be taking any of these provisions that you're talking about and applying them to that 90-day storage accumulation area. These are storage areas that are operated just like permitted storage areas, except they can keep the waste in there for 90 days, but they can keep waste in there all year round as long as they keep running it in and out of that area. And I think that those areas present just as great a risk and concern to communities as the permitted storage areas, and yet they're subject to a lot less requirements. For example, no closure. They don't have to have that financial assurance for closure. They have to meet a closure performance standards, but it's very unclear to me how all the various jurisdictions that are charged with doing the Permit by Rule program are even able to implement that closure performance standard adequately. And I'm seeing an awful lot of sites where there are former large quantity generator, these 90-day accumulation storage areas where they no longer know where they were located. There's no testing data, there's no records anywhere in any of these local jurisdictions. So my comment is, given the much greater number of these accumulation storage areas and the fact that they're actually in practice operated very much like a normal permitted storage area, what is DTSC going to be doing to look at that? Is there a statutory hook to go back and look at some of those in light of these new permitting standards relating to training, relating to emergency planning, relating to financial assurance, or some of those other aspects of the permitting program. I do think that the 109 Part B permitted facilities that we have and non-RCRA permitted facilities that we have in California are vastly outnumbered by the number of these accumulation storage areas that are properly numbered and located in Vallejo. And I do think that we need to start looking at how they're managed in a consistent way and by all of these many different jurisdictions that are managing that program.
Thank you. I'm going to give you a very short answer, but please feel free to send me a written question so I could answer it more in depth. The two financial mechanisms that were changed under this ruling was just financial test and the insurance. Okay, so all those other mechanisms have not been changed. Second of all, you bring up generator requirements under our Title 22, and you're right. Those generators that hold hazardous waste for less than 90 days are exempt from a hazardous waste permit for storage. And those are detailed in our Title 22 regulations. Now, the feds have just adopted a generator improvement rule, and DTSC is also looking at that. So that is on our future workload to bring in those federal improvements for generators, and that being, to be more specific, what training requirements, what financial requirements, etc. So that is work that we're looking in the future to improve upon.
Guidance, or is it going to be regulations?
It's going to be regulations. And then the third thing you brought up, which kind of blurs the line a little, is there's that hazardous waste facilities, and then there's the generators, and then you brought up the on-site tiers. The permit by rule, the conditional authorizations, and the conditional exemptions. These are generators that are authorized by statute, by law, to be able to operate without a permit as long as they meet certain conditions. And those conditions exist already.
Did anyone, I should ask, Alejandro, do we have any questions online or comments relating to this presentation?
No, we do not.
Okay, thank you. Were there any other questions or comments on this item? Yes, sir. And then we'll come back to you, Ms. Williams. We'll come back to you. I wanted to give an opportunity to somebody who hasn't spoken yet. If you could just introduce yourself.
I have just a quick question regarding the community involvement profile. I'm just curious what the agency hopes to have as a result of mandating a community involvement profile as a part of the permit application.
One of the reasons we adopted the community involvement profile is it was typically assigned to our public participation specialists right about the time we public notice our permit decisions. We want to bring this way up front when the permit is submitted, so we have both the facility aware and DTSC on notice as to what the demographics of the surrounding community is, so we can start getting that dialogue going. Because if we know the concerns, if we know what those other pollution burdens are up front, then we are at least more sensitized to some of the issues as we work through the permit.
Thank you, Brian. Ms. Williams, you have an additional comment or question?
Can you repeat again for me? You mentioned the requirement that the company had to have. You did a list, like you said. Was it not a line of credit, but a letter of credit and
surety bonds, financial test, insurance.
So how many?
There's 8 mechanisms.
So there's 8 mechanisms. So can you explain to me, because in my mind, that says as long as a company has the financial means to meet your criteria and they have enough money, they can come in and pollute in my community. So I'd like to really kind of understand it from a third grader or a kindergartner's understanding of what in your processes protect our communities from rich companies being able to come in and do their damage?
The financial assurance requirements are for our permitted facilities. What you are referring to is a company coming into a community that is going to be managing hazardous materials and maybe generating hazardous waste. We do not dictate or approve or issue permits to those facilities. We only issue them a permit if they're going to store their waste more than 90 days, or if they're going to handle waste that's generated by other generators and taken and received on their site for them to treat, store, dispose, or transfer that waste.
I'm talking about something that's already there that may have violated. So sorry. I'm talking about companies that are already in place that, are repeat violators or repeat offenders going by, whatever your processes are in place. Like, as long as they can meet your criteria and have this line of credit and insurance and bonds, they can continue to pretty much do what they're doing because they can afford to pay for it. Because you mentioned in your comments, you said something like, well, we need to ensure that they can pay for the damage that they're doing.
And then can I offer maybe an additional way to address the question that Ms. Williams has? The updates to the rules that Evelia was describing are in addition to existing requirements to protect human health and environment. That is the #1 charge and mission of this department. So in looking at our permitting program, getting feedback, I believe that this financial assurance issue came up as something that needed to be improved. So the permits and enforcement are aimed, and you can use your data in Evelia and RISGAR. The #1 goal is that it can be protective of human health and environment during the permit that's granted. That is the goal of the program and how it's written. In the case that there are releases, in the case that there is the company does have an impact on the environment and affects the surrounding community, the financial assurance requirements are to make sure they would be able to pay for that. But I just wanted to bring that back around and perhaps get added as well as far as that's something.
I just wanted to add, really this is to strengthen the financial assurance mechanism to make sure these facilities do have adequate funding to pay for any releases they may have if they walk away from the site. So the facility, so if they go bankrupt, we have the funds in our hands, so we can go back, the department can go back and clean up the contamination left in place. That's a strengthening that we brought in. And this charge, this law 673, gave us the opportunity to strengthen those laws and only focuses on the 109 permitted hazardous waste facility. It doesn't look at the 90-day generators that was mentioned earlier. This is specifically for a set of facilities that has a hazardous waste permit from DTSC.
If you haven't really shut any down or revoked their permits or suspended or really denied them, having these more stringent requirements is really not helping the community if in fact they still have the ability to pay, even if it is they're walking away. What good is your extra requirements if you're not really enforcing or shutting down the problem to begin with?
You're right. Financial assurance is only one factor that we looked at, but we presented today with 5 factors looked at. Violation scoring procedures, that's one of the other things. So there's a facility is continuing to violate the law and continue to be non-compliant with their permit. We have the tools to initiate denial where we take the permit away where the facility is required to shut down their operations and to go through closure. So there's other factors that we looked at to make sure to strengthen our permitting requirements, to make sure we've done in the news around the facility so that way they're not releasing waste in the environment. They do have that accident or release. They're required to have the funding in place. And this mechanism that we talked about actually just strengthens it. An example that was mentioned, some of the companies were allowed to have their insurance written somewhere in Delaware, somewhere else. Now we're saying, no, it needs to be approved by the state of California Department of Insurance. So those are the things that we wanted to tighten the rules to make sure we have control over these mechanisms.
Marty, and then we need to move on because we do have two more presentations this evening. Jerry, can you bring the mic to Marty?
Oh, no, I wasn't. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were. Oh, okay. Did anyone else have any other questions before we move on to our next presentation? I know we covered a lot of information, a lot of questions. Still have to resolve. Okay, thank you, Evelia. Thank you very much for your presentation and also for trying to answer some of the tough questions we're getting. We're now going to move to item number 4, which is our Northern California Regional Snapshot. A presentation by Mohsen and Nazemi, who will be talking about some of the projects that we're currently working on. And I already have some comment cards on this. So Mohsen, looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, and I'm going to try to go through this very quickly because I'd like to, first of all, provide time for comments, and some of these are projects that have already been brought up, so I think you have a good history and background relative to these projects. The first one that I wanted to bring up was the Hunters Point Naval Shipyard that you heard about earlier today, and that's an area in southeast San Francisco. It's a shipyard that was shut down by the Navy. And the photo on the right actually shows what it looked like in 1940s when it was active and there were a lot of ships brought into this site. The Navy acquired it in 1940, and less than half of the property is actually in the San Francisco Bay Area. In the Bay, I'm sorry, not the area, but it was a major shipyard, the West Coast, and a large amount of industrial activities happened at this site. As a result, there were various solvents, stripping paints, degreasing items, petroleum products, plating, metal plating, lubricants, and other type of material used. There were like transformers and other material, but it was also ship cleanup that contained radionuclide. So it did have the contamination associated with that cleanup as well. There was also PCBs and other material. When they sandblasted these ships, whatever material was on the outer or inner part of the ship also was deposited into the contaminated soil and groundwater in that area. And DTSC's role is we're the state agency that oversees the remediation work at this site, but actually the responsible party for the cleanup is the Navy, United States Navy, Department of Navy. And in 1989, this site was listed by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency as a what's called National Priority List, or NPL, which is the same as a Superfund site. You've heard about Superfunds. US EPA therefore became the lead agency for oversight at the federal level for investigation and cleanup of this site. And DTSC became the state lead agency for responsible to make sure that they also comply with the state law and other cleanup activities. The agencies typically do historic information review, development of sampling plans, review and comment on the sampling, overseeing the sampling, review the data, and then directing the cleanup as appropriate. While both the Navy and EPA have radiological expertise, DTSC also coordinates with the California Department of Public Health for support and oversight of any radiological work that is done in the state. So this is a map of the area. The sites show what each area or parcel is called, and you can see the parcel at various stages of investigation. Some of them are still being investigated and some have been transferred. However, I'll explain that the ones that have been investigated, we are going back to revisit those sites. In 2018, Navy and the agencies found out that the Navy contractor, Tetra Tech EC, had falsified radiological data. And in fact, 2 of their employees were indicted and they were supervisors. Yes, thank you. They were indicted and they're serving jail sentences. So DTSC and other oversight agencies requested that the Navy resample the area, and after many meetings, the Navy agreed to resample all parcels that were previously sampled by Tetra Tech EC. With respect to parcel A, this is an area or parcel that had already been released, and there is part of parcel A or parcel A1 has been developed. As we heard earlier from Bradley, there are actually residents who live in parcel A1. There was a concern that because of Tetra Tech falsification, that area may also have contamination. So independent from DTSC, the California Department of Public Health took the lead in responding to that question, and they did a site survey or radiological survey, and they communicated the results to the homeowner association, and the final report, I was told, will be available in the next few weeks on CDPH website. All the other parcels have not yet been released to the city, and which have been previously, especially those that have previously been tested by Tetra Tech, and will be resampled. So as of now, field work includes investigation, excavation, sampling, radiological survey, and any further future remediation if required. And the final work plan for radiological resampling of parcel G, which is the first parcel that is being resampled, is expected to be finalized by the Navy, and actual resampling is expected to start in first quarter of 2019. And the radiological resampling will include field oversight by regulatory agency staff, and we are working to ensure that properties are safe for current and future use prior to transfer to the city. So that was a very quick overview of what is going on with Hunters Point. If you like to get more information, please visit our website, and I'll stop here to see if there are any questions.
Mr. Angel.
Thanks, Mohsen. I do appreciate that you would come to the Bayview Task Force, the Mental Justice Task Force meeting, and really listen as well as present. So we appreciate that. A couple things. I mentioned earlier the disappointment seeing the claim on here, repeating the BS from the State Department of Public Health that everything's fine at Parcel A, where they built hundreds of homes, where your agency swore up and down to the homeowners that everything was fine, and there couldn't possibly be any radioactive waste. So in this document that you handed out tonight, was presented, you say, well, California DPH said everything was fine, no risk. You left out, as I mentioned earlier, that a highly radioactive marker was found feet from homes. You left out that no testing whatsoever was done under people's bedrooms, under their homes. You left out that the survey equipment that CDPH used with your agency's blessing was basically a golf cart with a detector that only was designed to detect one of 3 types of radiation and only a few inches down. That's pretty important information. If you all think that's a good survey to protect public health, we're in the wrong place here. We're all wasting our time. So Dr. Williams, please look into this. Now, a question. You talked about parcel J. So the question is, did DTSC comment on parcel E and E2? Because under the federal Superfund law, there was a 5-year statutory review. And as you know, the Navy and Lennar plan on leaving highly radioactive waste from atomic bomb residue buried at San Francisco Bay waterfront, where Lennar and the government and City Hall thinks it's okay to turn into a park, open space. And so, number one, did DTSC comment on the Navy's proposed remedy for leaving the radioactive and toxic waste buried at the shoreline at parcel E2? And secondly, what do you think? Are you aware, or are you concerned that the Bay Conservation and Development Commission, to their credit, unlike all the other agencies, actually pointed out, as we have, that the Navy used outdated sea level rise projections in order to justify their dangerous, reckless plan. And so I want to know, did DTSC comment on this? Did you agree with the Navy's plan? If you didn't comment or don't agree, do you agree with BCDC, or are you aware of this? And what are you going to do about it? Because the plan to leave radioactive waste from atomic bomb tests by San Francisco Bay waterfront with what BCDC, that the state of California acknowledges has the best scientific sea level rise projections, they critique the Navy. And the Navy's response to comments was, well, we'll see if the problem gets worse. So they pretty much acknowledge they're using outdated data. It's DTSC's responsibility to use the best science. That ain't happening, and I haven't heard a peep from DTSC about this. And that's really reckless because you all do it as an agency, not individually, dirty work for the mega developers like Lenore.
So thank you for your comments, Bradley. On the parcel A, again, CDTH was directly addressing that, not through DTSC or US EPA.
You only put one part of the story.
Bradley, can you let Mr. Mohsen Nazemi answer your questions?
I think Mr. Angel is referring to a deck marker that was found 10 inches below surface at an area that was not next to the development, but it was outside in a fenced area. I don't want to
speak from the homes. From the homes.
Mr. Angel, we we allowed you to ask your question. You were given 3 minutes. You have to allow him an opportunity to respond. Thank you.
I would urge anybody who's not familiar with this, I'm sure Mr. Angel is very familiar, to look at this final report or even go to the CDTH website. They have explained the risk associated with that deck marker. And again, I'm not a radiological expert and I don't want to speak for CDTH, but I urge you to go onto the website and look at that information. As far as the other 2 questions you have, I have to get back to you. I wasn't with DTSC at the time when that remediation remedy was approved.
Oh, it's just a couple months ago.
And I would, well, that is not something that we have approved yet. So if that's a couple of months ago, that is a proposal by the Navy.
Did DTSC comment during this statutory time period?
I will need to get back to you to let you know.
That's the question. Okay. And specifically is, it was a 5-year statutory review of the federal Superfund law.
Right.
Green Action commented, I believe EPA commented and disagreed. The Conservation and Development Commission, in very diplomatic regulatory agency terms, pretty much told Navy they were using outdated, incorrect data. And the Navy blew off all of this scientific response. So we want to know what DTSC, did you do your due diligence, not you personally, but your agency, review this and comment in a timely fashion? If not, why? And I would say also it's not true. We'd like to discuss it.
I'll get back to you on those 2 questions.
We also have a comment card from Mr. John Hulls. Right here, Mark, Mr. Hulls, over here.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to comment more on some of the testing aspects that are going on here. I mentioned last meeting that I came to, I'm an author and I write a column for a local newspaper, and I'm also a scientist who ran a 2-year multi-million-dollar project on microbial ecology for the state of California, so I'm fairly familiar with the testing. And I have to tell you, and this is not directed at you, but just at the overall response, I tried to follow up on Zuckerberg's complaint to the Office of Emergency Services. And as Matt said, DTSC are the only people who responded in any meaningful way. I got some answers from a couple of agencies which were so obviously scientifically wrong. When I sent them an email back and pointed it out, they would refuse to speak to me anymore. But what I wanted to bring up is a real problem that looking at that whole complaint that Matt filed was an exercise in research of science and policy that was extremely frustrating. And what I'd like to see is some way that the results of DTSC's tests and investigations are immediately made available to the public. And to give you an example from Drake's Estero, what's going on out there is DTSC came out and they saw that the contractor had let numerous wood fragments from the oyster rags scattered over a couple of acres. And it's very quick with an X-ray spectrometer to just find out exactly what's in that as far as heavy metals and VOCs and such like that. Many of the samples tested through the roof. Here you have a case where people go out there and they collect wood for campfires. You use great kindling to start a barbecue. And also, there's cleanup crews that they have these cleanup parties out on the Estero, and this stuff is washing back and forth and showing up on the shoreline. The people are picking this stuff up. And yet, nobody seems to want to notify people that they're handling toxic waste. And I know that you referred your investigation to the Marin County DA's office, but there's no way for somebody, if he decides to do nothing and decides he doesn't want to handle a complex scientific case, all your work will just be lost to the public. And I really hope that you come up with some way. Actually, you may know from the English accent, long ago and far away. There's a great line that they have, and that is, persons of responsibility are aiding the police with their investigations. So I don't think you need to show deference to contractors who are violating the law. I think you could just say, we came out, we did this test, here's what it shows, here's who we've notified. And if you did that, I think it would go a long way to making protection of the public more accessible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moss. Were there any questions or comments specifically about the Baby Hunters Point part of the presentation?
There were no questions here online. No.
Okay, thank you, Alejandro. Does anyone have any questions or comments about Baby Hunters Point? Ms. Williams?
Yes, with the CD, the Department of Health, it was ironic that throughout the years with all of our poor communities, whenever they came in to do a health assessment, it always came back, there's no risk to the residents. And I'm just wondering, is that something that you all are, in this new process, taking a better look at and a more closer look at, that you cannot have the reported illnesses and the things that are being reported out of our communities, whether it's Midway Village and Daly City, where DTSC went in and capped 2 feet of slab over toxic soil and deemed it clean, that is still allowed under the low-income residents' homes, that you all say it's no risk to them, and yet they have high rates of cancer and children being born with all kind of abnormalities. We have Vallejo, where we still have some areas where there's live ordnance, live ammunition still in the ground, question of radiation. They still say, well, it's okay to build homes. Same thing is going on over there in Hunters Point. And we point to Tetra Tech, but it's kind of like Lennar, who is the home builders, are like flying under the radar. Why aren't they in jail? Why isn't there attention on them? Again, your agency is tasked to go after the bad actors, supposedly, right? Why isn't that happening? And when they talked about their supposed independent surveys out there at Hunters Point, I have family that live there and still live there. And I remember when you could light a lighter with the water coming out of the faucet, and it would light up. And that was before we had internet and cell phones and be able to catch all of that. And it was a number of blocks in Vallejo, Hunters Point, of people reporting that they could do that. We remember the smoldering in the grounds. We remember, kids looking at things that didn't quite look right. We had no idea that it was still as contaminated with radioactive waste, only to be lied to over and over. So again, what new processes will you guys look at when it comes to the Department of Health coming back with the same claim, there is no risk to the residents? You've got to start taking a closer look at that.
Thank you. And it is a separate department from DTSC, and it's not under Cali PA, but it is a department that has state expertise in radiological aspect, maybe not necessarily in chemical or toxics, but radiological. So we don't rely on Department of Health and Department of Health Services for toxics and chemicals. We only look at them for assistance when it comes to radiological aspects.
So you did comment, you put it in here that it's no risk.
Just radiological survey, that's all they were looking at. However, DTSC did certify the site for other chemicals, and those were considered to be acceptable for residential use. And maybe this is a good point, and I know we're late, but let me just explain something, because I've heard this so many times when I go to public meetings, and many members of the public believe that the only way that a site is considered acceptable is if all of the contamination is removed and taken off of that site. And ideally, that might be the best way to do it. But again, we were just hearing that you're going to take it out of one EJ community and put it in another EJ community. There is a number of sites in the state of California and everywhere else in the United States that there are some land use covenants or conditions that are imposed on the site that, as long as, and I'll give you a real good example, is asbestos in our buildings. As long as it is encapsulated and it's not disturbed, it's not bothering us, it's not getting into our lines. But as soon as somebody starts to scrape your ceiling or the walls or joints and tiles and roof tiles, then it becomes airborne and it causes health problems. So there are ways to encapsulate waste as long as it is not being exposed and dug out and it is safe. So when you say they did a risk analysis, that's probably something that they looked at. And it's not in every case that the contamination is removed from the site and taken off site that will make the site safe.
Well, the problem with your explanation, though, is that when you say that certain levels are acceptable in certain environments, but the problem is that these allowable toxins and contaminants always seem to end up in communities of people that look like me. It's not in communities where folks that can afford, a nicer, clean environment. You guys don't use that analogy when it comes to them. So, we need you to approach these processes like you're living in my community.
We totally appreciate your comment. Under our regulations, we do our best. There is no provision that says what area is acceptable to leave the waste in. It's the land use that makes the determination. So let me move on. And I don't know how much time we have, Meredith, to go through all the presentations, but because Treasure Island was also mentioned, I just want to go through a few of the slides to first of all, Treasure Island is an area right next to the Bay Bridge between East Bay and San Francisco area. And the right picture is a map, a picture that was taken in 1936 during the Army Corps of Engineer construction. There was a Treasure Island World Fair that was part of construction of this island. And Yerba Buena Island is visible on the left side and a photo of the Bay Bridge also. So this is you have a copy of this presentation. You can read the history of the site. I'm not going to go through this just for the sake of moving along to get to where we are with the site investigation and cleanup. The Navy, again, in this case, is the lead responsible agency for the investigation and cleanup of the site. And DTSC is the state oversight agency. We do contract with California Department of Public Health for radiological oversight of this. The type of history and contamination sources is listed here, and you can see it varies from fire training, bunker area, solid waste disposal, dry cleaning facility, training, storage area, radiological decontamination of the ships, and radiological training. This is a map of the various parcels. The green, for example, is parcel 24, which is the dry cleaner side. Parcels 2632, the light blue and dark orange for the training areas. And parcels 12A, B, navy, retain, orange, housing and solid waste disposal areas. One of the points that was brought up earlier was during a tour of environmental justice tour of Treasure Island. There was a stockpile at this right picture where you don't see a stockpile anymore that was concerned to the community. And DTSC worked with the Navy to make sure that they remove that stockpile. And the area that you see here is a site called Site 32, and that's where, when they do this scanning, when they do an excavation of the soil at Treasure Island, they bring it to this area, they spread it out to scan it to find out whether or not there's contamination, how much there is, and decide what type of landfill will accept this waste. So if it is considered hazardous waste that the state cannot accept it, then it'll go outside the state to a permitted hazardous waste site. If it can be accepted within the state, then it'll go to a landfill within the state. And here's the quick ongoing activity. Our investigation for Site 12 remediation and survey will extend through 2021. The radiological program will be extended to 2022, chemical remediation to 2023. There will be other activities such as what Mr. Angel was talking about. There will be a 5-year review of the remedies that are scheduled to be completed in 2049 throughout the life of this site. And we are trying to enhance and ensure site control protective for the residents. And this is, again, our website, that if you'd like to get more information about Treasure Island, I invite you to go to our website and take a look at it. I'll pause quickly here to see if there are any questions.
Brian, is that your name, Brian? And just a second for the mic.
I'm voice carrier, but for the sake of the listener.
For the webcast.
Thank you. I just had a couple questions. One, I just wanted to kind of follow up on Ms. Williams' comments. And also, I think something else I heard in terms of, I think Californians look to DTSC for insights, protection, understandings around contamination. It's like our local toxic police, if you will, especially in light of especially in light of like current conditions in terms of the federal government. I think it puts the onus on our state agencies even more. So a couple questions that I had were first, can you speak to who is the contractor remediating Treasure Island? Second question is, does DTSC have an opinion or a stance on the contractor Tetra Tech in light of what happened at Baby Marsh Point? And then thirdly, to Ms. Williams' point, I think, granted, the permitting around hazardous waste, those improvements were largely the presentation of Evelia. But I think there's still concern around contaminated sites that aren't hazardous waste sites. And so I think one of the things that I was thinking of listening to Ms. Williams talk is, when DTSC comes in and does a remediation project, is it possible to limit the future uses based on the great understandings and insights that you all have as experts in remediation? Those are the key questions I had.
Thank you for your questions. And I know that Tetra Tech was the contractor at Treasure Island as well at the time that they were conducting a site survey and remediation. Actually, the California Department of Public Health was doing not only oversight, but also doing their own independent sampling. And there has not been any allegations raised about the work that Tetra Tech has done at Treasure Island. As far as you had a list of questions, I have to make sure I remember all of it.
The second was just in light of what happened.
Yes, the Tetra Tech has been sued by individuals, and as you heard, the U.S. government just joined that lawsuit a couple of weeks ago. DTSC and Attorney General's office have looked at our options, and I can't discuss that with you, but we have considered what actions can we take against Tetra Tech. That's something that's attorney-client privilege, and I can't speak to that.
More so, I was getting at is Tetra Tech a contractor that DTSC foresees is going to continue to work with and will work with them in the future?
So let me just give you an example of what DTSC did just last month. We learned that a couple of the employees that Tetra Tech BC had hired at the time when they were investigating and doing work at Hunter's Point had subsequently been hired by a different contractor, which now Navy has contracted to oversee the resampling at Hunter's Point. And even though none of those employees were accused of any wrongdoing, PTSD felt that it was important for either actual or perceived conflict of interest that these employees not be overseeing the work that is going to be done at Hunter's Point. So we wrote a letter to the Navy along with CDPH. It was a joint letter. And just last week, the Navy responded and told us that although they felt that these employees were vetted thoroughly before they were hired, that in consideration of concern, they're not going to use these employees for that site. So I think that covers 3 of your 4 questions. What was the last one?
The last one, I saw a head shaking. The last one was just the DTSC's expertise around information. In instances this group was referring to where DTSC was a part of the remediation and then they transfer the land back to whoever is ownership, putting limits on the uses based on the insights that you all gained in the remediation process.
And that is, again, a very complex process, and I appreciate the confusion that whether we permit them to build something or not. DTSC generally requires cleanup of the site based on the health risk associated with contamination, whether it's on-site health risk associated with what will happen to that site after the cleanup, or any off-site migration to the community around the site. Clearly, if there's off-site migration, whether it's through the soil, air, or water, those are addressed as part of the cleanup. But when it comes to the site itself, it depends on what the anticipated future use of the site is. For example, if a developer or the landowner comes to DTSC and says they want to use this site for residential development, they have to clean up the site to residential standards. But if they come in and say they only want to allow commercial or industrial sites to be put at this particular location, then the risk is going to be different, because now you don't have somebody living there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And based on that risk assessment and analysis, you can allow other remedies aside from just excavating everything and moving it off-site. You can allow some sort of a remediation on site. You can allow putting a impermeable cover and cap with regular maintenance and other operating work. You can allow them to put in soil vapor extraction system to remove the vapors. So there are different type of methods that can be utilized. But again, it depends on not DTSC's decision, but whoever, whether it's the local government or the developer, want to use that site for, and that determines what level of cleanup needs to happen.
I'd like to add one more thing, Mohsen, to the response you just provided, which is if there is if the site is cleaned up to the future land use, then that information is made publicly available as to what that cleanup standard was. And there is, and I think has been, instances where land use covenants are placed on specific properties to make sure that if someone in the future wants to be able to use that land for residential when commercial, then they should have that restriction of the land use covenant, and any future cleanup that might be required, DTSC should be involved in as well. Is that accurate, Mohsen?
Yes. And those covenants are maintained by the county or the city, and when the next developer comes about, if they want to change that, they have to come back to DTSC and they have to do additional further cleanup in order to be able to use it.
Ms. Williams and Ms. Walters?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add, I know you guys are sick of hearing from me, but I've been at this for 30 years, and I've been dealing with DTSC for 30 years. And I know you all aren't taking it personal, because it's not meant personal, but Department of Toxic Substance Control. And we look at Lennar Home Builders and Tetra Tech contractors at Hunters Point, at Treasure Island, and at Vallejo. We have environmental racism staring us straight in the face. It's just blatant. Because for those that haven't been in this 5 years or in this process like this, you wouldn't necessarily know that Treasure Island has low-income Black folks and minorities living on that site. Same thing in Hunters Point, same thing in South Vallejo, same thing in Richmond. It's like at some point, we have to have these real conversations that your department has allowed this to go on, and we're going into 2019. As a kid, thinking 2019, like that was like the Jetsons flying through the air and, future stuff. And now we're here. And like 30 years ago, we thought, okay, within 5 years, they'll get it because we've got this 5-year, review coming up. And you guys sound like 30 years ago with the new concept, but it's the same thing. And what's happening in the meantime is that I'm burying my loved ones, my family members. I just buried another family member about 3 months ago who lived on all these sites, from Hunters Point to Treasure Island and then in Richmond. And I can tell you that there are a lot of minorities who have lived in these areas that had no clue as to what has killed their family members, their friends, their loved ones, their neighbors. At some point, we've got to stop in our tracks and say, we definitely are going to do things differently. But as it stands right now, when we keep bringing up Tetra Tech and Lennar, it's like we shouldn't be here having to tell you all every site that these folks have been on has to be reopened and reevaluated and retested with a company that has some kind of morals and ethics to them, that they'll come in and do the right thing. You all get paid to protect and control this process. You're supposed to be protecting our health. It's like, how many years do we keep coming back begging you all put in some real processes in place so that we don't have to keep coming in here, and as some people call it, playing the race card? We're not playing the race card. It is the race card. And at this point in time, we're nice, but we're tired of playing nice. We want you guys, through these new processes, we want to see some real reduction and elimination of these kind of conditions in our community.
Thank you, Ms. Williams.
And I do want to say thank you for the opportunity to come tonight and talk with you all.
And now it's Ms. Walter's turn. But we're not sick of hearing from you. The whole purpose of us having these meetings in communities like Oakland and San Pedro, which is adjacent to the Port of Los Angeles, is so that we can hear directly from the folks who are feeling whatever they're feeling. We heard some positive things about DTSC tonight, but we obviously are hearing some negative things, some deeply felt negative things about DTSC tonight as well. We're taking that in. That's the whole goal That's the whole reason we're here, is to hear from you. So I want to thank you for taking the time and coming out and sharing your thoughts and feelings with us, because we need to hear it. We need to know. Thank you. I appreciate you. Ms. Walters?
I drove down from Plymouth County, and I appreciate you guys doing the meeting too, although I would love if you did it somewhere closer to us at some point. I also wanted to just respond to something you were talking about with land use controls. I've personally, within the last 6 months, seen a couple of different instances where land use controls on a parcel that was then subsequently subdivided got lost in the process, and the developers did not pick up those land use controls, and they also lost the location of the the cap or the area that's supposed to be contained in there. So if I'm seeing it twice in 2 months, it's definitely happening. And I think that gets back to this ongoing discussion about the role of DTSC in the bigger picture, what happens in long-term management of toxics. On site mitigation, I'm going to make my comment about this because it's not about the military basis, but it goes further to the discussion about DTSC and the site mitigation program. I'm particularly concerned about soil vapor intrusion backing up. I'm particularly concerned about release reporting and non-emergency release reporting for DTSC and the triggers for cleanup under the site mitigation program and the Hazardous Substances Account Act. What I am seeing out in the wild is that there appears to be more and more reluctance to report releases, especially doing that by avoiding collecting groundwater and soil sample and just doing soil vapor gas. And that gets back to this issue of soil vapor, where we're seeing a lot of soil vapor clouds in the subsurface, but without the associated groundwater and soil contamination. And people are basically saying there's no trigger for that under the Hazardous Substances Account Act or other site mitigation statutory programs. And I would like to ask if that is in fact the case, that if you are only seeing or if you're only collecting soil gas data, does that get you out through some crazy loophole of DTSC because you either haven't collected the data or you haven't seen contamination in other media? So generally speaking, I think I'm seeing a much more common strategy to work around DTSC's reporting and release triggers for investigation and cleanup. And it's a big concern of mine because I think it gets back to this issue of the greater community need to address toxics in a holistic way and not so mired down in the statutory aspects of what DTSC does.
Thank you. Those are good questions, a number of them. But let me try to address some of them, and then we need to talk to you maybe offline for more detailed conversation. In terms of soil and water analysis, the soil vapor analysis is on top of that. It's not in lieu of. And so we need to know first what contamination is in the soil, what's in the water, and then see if there's any of it that is either through the soil itself or from water into the soil coming up. And just as an FYI, we are working directly with the Water Board on a new vapor intrusion guidance document, and we would like to release that for public review and comments very soon. So that is the next topic that is very important.
What I'm telling you is that people are not looking for it, so that they don't have to find it.
And these guidances would provide ways to look for it so that it can be done. And then lastly, on your comment about a couple of land use covenants that have not been followed, is there any way you can tell us which sites these are so we can look into those?
Of course I can. Sorry.
Okay. All right.
So, Mohsen, in the interest of time, we're going to skip the last portion of your presentation. Everyone has hard copies of it, and we have it available in English and Spanish. And for those on the web, if you don't have it, we will have it available online very shortly.
And I'll stay around if you have any questions. Thank you.
We have one more presentation, and it is Mr. Keith Kahara's presentation. And it actually is very different from the others because it's much more visually based. So Keith, if you could begin your presentation, please.
Good evening. I'm Keith Kihara. I'm the Chief of the Enforcement and Emergency Response Division at DTSC. I'm here to give you an update about our response to the Camp Fire, which is in Butte County. So the Camp Fire is the most deadly wildfire in California history. It has 86 confirmed deaths related to it. It engulfed, although it only lasts 17 days, it engulfed over 150,000 acres, which is roughly the size of the city and county of San Francisco. It destroyed more than 18,000 buildings, and it required the evacuation of approximately 50,000 people. The estimates of the economic impact of this fire range anywhere from $16.5 billion to $30 billion. Now, granted, the scope of this fire is the largest fire that we've had to deal with, but I want to let you know that DTSC is committed to stay until we've evaluated all the parcels impacted and either removed waste or cleared sites so that our sister agency, CalRecycle, can come in and clear off the former residential parcels. So basically what we do is when we come in, we take a look at a property, we determine whether there's household hazardous waste located on the site. If there is, we'll remove it. Some of the other things we'll look for are, for example, a lot of older homes will have asbestos-containing materials as part of the building, either the structure or what's referred to as insulation, thermal systems insulation. So you'll find like chimney flues will very often have asbestos-containing materials. As of today, we've actually assessed 13,047 properties in Butte County. We've also completed our activities in Los Angeles as part of the Woolsey fire. There were 1,416 parcels evaluated, and the Hill fire, which is in Ventura County, had 297 parcels evaluated, and the work in Ventura has also been completed. So examples of the kind of household hazardous waste we will encounter are things like household batteries and aerosol cans, lead acid batteries, compressed gas cylinders and bulk pesticides, fertilizers and pool chemicals, paints and thinners, asbestos siding, pipe insulation, and tiles, and cathode ray tubes from either televisions or computer monitors and other assorted electronic devices. If you, one of the things we have is a dashboard set up on our public website, and you can track our progress as we clear parcels. My staff on the ground actually have devices where as we go through a parcel, evaluate and clear a parcel, we add it to the total, and this the map on our website is actually updated in real time. It's color coded so you can kind of see what our activities are. I apologize for this particular image. I had a deadline to produce this slide, so it was somewhere before we were actually close today. So if you look, it says on this slide that we had cleared 8,914 parcels. So it was a little while ago. Here's my contact information. This is also the web address for our dashboard. And to close, I wanted to share an image that my people in Butte County had shared with me earlier this week. And the reason I want to share it with you is because in spite of all the damage and destruction the wildfires had caused, there's still, for me, this photo kind of reflects the resilience of the people of the state of California and how, in spite of all of the damage that was done, there's still hope and we will rebuild. And I know all the people in Butte County and in Los Angeles and Ventura certainly will rebuild their lives. So thank you.
Thank you. We have a comment card, Ms. Dodson. Ms. Dodson not in. Okay, Ms. Walters.
Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to make one comment and a question. My comment is the photo that you're using, it's really traumatic to people from there. I had to drive through this area on my way here. I would really highly suggest you use maybe a nice picture of paradise to introduce your talk and not the destruction of paradise. Moving on, given the reoccurrence of devastating wildfires in California, I'm just curious, I don't understand really how, what's the statutory authorities and sort of what programs are overreaching or overtop this effort to address hazmat at all of these residential facilities. And I'm just wondering if that's something that the Newsom administration is going to be looking to bolster some of that program to better prepare for future kinds of events like this, as we're all pretty terrified of getting into another situation like this, but we're not seeing any real relief at this stage. So just to summarize, I'm really curious about sort of how, what laws you're operating under, whether you're going to be requesting new statutory authorities, and then I'll just comment the administrative process for navigating through, and I don't know if it was Cal Recycle or DTSC, but it was really hard for a lot of faculties, and the deadlines were tough, and I think it's a pretty tough program for some people to navigate through.
Certainly, there's existing regulatory or statutory authority that we use. It's in the California Health and Safety Code. It's section 25-359. It allows the department to come in and do an emergency removal if there's a finding of imminent and substantial endangerment. So typically, what happens is after the fire, the local health aid officer will make a finding that there's an imminent threat. We get what's called mission task by the California Office of Emergency Services to respond and provide these services. When we approach these sites, it's always after the fire's been contained and it's safe for us to go in with our contractors. We work as part of a team, typically with somebody from the local health department, because they're the ones that actually made the determination that there was an imminent threat. We'll go in, we'll assess the parcel, and remove waste that we find. I forgot to mention that we also are encountering smoke detectors, which have a low-level radioactive source. So we do take care of those as well. We'll remove those and properly manage them. So that's typically how we work. Because there are emergencies, there's two primary funding sources. One is through the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. So there's federal disaster money, but also there's something called the California Disaster. Oh God, you're going to ask me this. I always refer to it as by its acronym, which is CDAA. So it's California Disaster something assistance appropriation, I think is what it is. And so that's a state fund. I think it draws from the general fund in response to emergencies. So one of those two funding sources is typically what we use to respond. Whether there's an augmentation, disasters are hard to predict. So you're not really sure how much they're going to cost. We work very closely with our control agency, which is the Department of Finance, whenever something like this comes up, and also with the California legislature to make sure that the appropriate amount of money is appropriated so that we can respond. But our immediate task is we sort of worry about doing the response first, and then the money's sort of sorted out in the long run. But I can tell you I've been involved with emergency response for about 5 or 6 years, and the wildfires have been not really that big of an issue. They have, I'm sure you've noticed, gotten worse more recently. Fire's been more of an issue, and the economic impact of it has been more serious as we've gone on. I hate to use the phrase, that's the new normal, but it does sort of seem like that. And again, we'll respond within whatever our power is to do that. We have a sister agency, again, that comes in later after we've done the sweep, clearing all the hazardous waste and all the hazards. When they come through to remove what's left of the home sites, they will sometimes encounter hazardous waste that we've missed. So even though we've done this clearance the first time, we'll still be on call and we will still respond. So I think I'm anticipating Cal Recycle's probably going to be in Paradise in Butte County for some time. Okay. And did I answer your question? Okay.
Did anyone else have any questions or comments? Yes, sir. You could just tell us your name.
I'm Cameron. I have a question about whether or not the DTSC had any hand or say in the filter that was brought in for the Camp Fire cleanup and all the other subsequent fires that have taken place over the last few years.
Okay, DTSC has our own contractors. Tetra Tech EC is not one of our contractors. We don't use them. We have a sister agency, Cal Recycle, that I understand is using them. I understand Mr. Angel has some concerns about their use of them. I will pass that along to my colleagues that manage that. I can't really address why Tetra Tech EC was selected by them as a contractor. There could be a variety of reasons, but anything that I would tell you would be pure speculation on my part.
I just want to clarify. Tetra Tech EC was not selected by Cal Recycle. It was Tetra Tech, a separate entity from Tetra Tech EC, a separate subsidiary of Tetra Tech.
Thank you, Cameron. Does anyone else have any questions about this particular item? Now, did you have a question? Alejandro, are there any questions on the email?
There are no questions on the email.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Dodson, now that you've returned, did you have a comment or question on this item?
Yes. So many times, Vallejo and South Vallejo and people of my color are left out of all these things that happen, all the good things. Many times, things happen. They go to Mare Island, they go to Petaluma, they go to Santa Rosa and say, yeah, we got Vallejo. And when it's in Vallejo, it's not the black part of town. We need for you, with your expertise, to actually come out to South Vallejo, set up an advisory group, community advisory group, and talk to us. We're interested, but you don't see us here because we didn't know. I was here this morning and got lost because it was a miscommunication of where it should have been from 10 until 1. Didn't know where I was going. Went back to Vallejo and came back this evening hoping that this was going to be at least a part of what I wanted to hear about. I'm glad you're here, but I would like for your groups to come to Vallejo, South Vallejo particularly, on a regular basis and talk to us. You can give advice, but let us tell you what we need, what we want to see, and how to somehow put a buffer around
our area to protect us, like it was said before. We have some ideas. We want you to listen to us. We don't want you to tell us what you're going to do. We want you to listen to us. We've been for years. I'm over 77 years old. I'm 83. I don't know how much longer I'll live. And I've been lucky enough to be here just to say that I'm, I guess, fairly healthy. I have asthma, but so many of my relatives are gone too. Cancers, emphysema, COPD, which is cardiac obstructive pulmonary diseases, palsies, cancers of all sorts, all because our soil, our water, and our air are contaminated. We live in an area that is beautiful, but people are allowed, that shouldn't be allowed, to come into our area and they're tearing it up, including our leaders, city council, planning commissioners, our council people, Mr. Mike Thompson, is that his name? Mike Thompson? And his group, they're all in cahoots. They want to do things to destroy us, all for the sake of money and power. We almost don't have a voice, but just like the representation here, a lot of us don't know what's going on out here. The message isn't going out, and we do want to be heard. We do want to make changes, and we have ways to tell you how to change things that will help us and help our children. Monitoring, it's okay, but it reminds me of when the body requires liquid, you need water. The remedy is not just to monitor. Your body's telling you you need something. So when you drink water, that's a remedy. Monitors are great. That's not the answer. When you go outside, you get sick. You breathe in all those pollutants. There are answers that we have that we can contribute other than monitoring. Once the situations have been put under control, then we can do some other sideline things. And we need help. Please come out. Plan to do some advisory meetings often. Let us see who you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I think it's important, and also Ms. Williams, everyone here continues to hear from you, and I do apologize again for any confusion this morning of you not being able to find the meeting with that incomplete information. I appreciate deeply the invitation to come out and meet with you in Vallejo, and we'll follow up with you directly on that at a time that works best for you, and bringing my colleagues to listen and also better understand what we might be able to do to better understand and to work, whether it's within what we already have authority to do or reaching out to others who might be able to help and assist. So please count on us for that opportunity to meet with you soon, and I'll get your contact information.
If there are no other questions about this particular presentation, I think we're at the close of our meeting. Well, first I wanted to make sure that we thank the folks who worked on logistics and made sure that all the copies were made, that we had Spanish language translation available, that the translation occurred in a timely manner. We call it the village of folks who come together. So I want to thank the folks from Sacramento who made their way here today and helped out. Marcus Simpson, Veronica Villasenor, Tammy Pickens, Patrick Barclay, who has helped make the magic happen in terms of making it available on the website. And then the folks in our Berkeley office who worked really hard to outreach, made the copies, and made sure the facility was working with us, Alejandro Vivas, Asha Seti, and Jerry Dietrich. And then the person who herds all the cats and makes it happen for all of us is Patrice Bowen. Patrice in the beret. I want to thank all of you from DTSC, because without you, the meeting couldn't happen. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Meredith Williams for final comment.
Again, I just want to thank everybody for attending. As I've taken on this new role, I've begun to appreciate the layers of the onion as you peel these questions back. And I appreciate your perspective on the deep history associated with a lot of these issues and how deeply they're affecting the communities. And with that in mind, I would just say one thing I walk away with is we have to find ways to communicate about that complexity. It is a mystery. I've only been in government service for 5 years. The alphabet soup,
this authority versus this authority, in my opinion, why can't we just, right? Why can't we just? And there are reasons why we can't just do A, B, or C. But it's really hard to sit on the outside and not be able to connect the dots for how do you get to the right person to address a question, and what's the end of your authority on this in this area versus an authority on other areas. So I will be asking our executive team to take that very much to heart, to think about other meetings like this and how we can, perhaps Vallejo is an opportunity to think about how we can be integrated and help people understand the points of intersection, points of engagement, so that we can continue to have these, not just this level of engagement, but even deeper engagements. I really appreciate the turnout this evening and all of the very thoughtful comments.
With that, we will adjourn. Everyone, hope you have a safe ride, drive, or walk home. Thank you.